Hi, and welcome to Crafts with Ash DIY and Decor. My name's Ashley, and today I am bringing you 10 really easy must-try patriotic DIYs. I put together my top 10 favorite and what I think was the easiest DIYs that I did last year for you this year. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that little notification bell so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. I upload lots of content that I know that you're not going to want to miss, and after taking a short break, I'm back and hopefully better than ever. Alright, so let's get started with these very easy patriotic DIYs. For my first DIY, we are going to start off super easy. So I picked out this little flag hanger that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just ripping it apart by cutting the thread around the edges, and now you have two separate pieces. Next, I just used my hands to flatten one of the pieces of the flag, and then I also pulled out any of the extra thread that was around the edges. After that, I took this cute little white fluffy pillow that I got from the Dollar Tree, and first, I cut off the tags of the pillow, and then I just simply used this fabric glue to glue it on top, and it was that simple. The easiest way I found to do this was put a bunch of glue on the back of that little flag piece and then just use my fingers to smear it all around. Then I placed that flag in the middle of the pillow and pushed down really hard. Now I have had this pillow for a few days now and it seems to be holding up well. So I would say that this glue from the Dollar Tree was pretty good. So I absolutely love how this came out. It was so simple, and it's perfect to add to some main pillows that might be on your couch that you already have, just to give it that little touch of patriotism. So my only regret was not grabbing another pillow to do another one. But what do you think? For my next DIY, I'm going to start off with 3 of these galvanized stars that I got from the Dollar Tree and this star sign that also came from the Dollar Tree. The first thing I did was rip off all the stars from the burlap fabric, and now I'm just sanding it down really well to get rid of all the glitter but also bring out the natural board underneath to bring out that rustic look. Next, by using this 3D pop-up tape that I got from the Dollar Tree, I'm going to glue down or tape the colored stars on top of the galvanized stars. So I just cut off a few strips and laid them onto the colored stars, and then I'm going to push them right in the middle of the galvanized stars to give it that 3D look. Next, by using my Waverly Antique Wax from Walmart and my favorite distressing brush, I'm going to distress the edges and a little bit in the middle of the colored stars and the galvanized stars to give it a rustic touch. Now, if you do not like the rustic looks, you can absolutely skip this step. It's totally up to you, and it's whatever you like. I just want to take this opportunity to welcome you to my channel. If you are new here, thank you so much for choosing to stop by. I really hope that you enjoy what you see and that you love all of these DIYs. And if you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. I truly appreciate your support and love every single one of my subscribers. And reading all your comments, I am working my way through answering all of them, but thank you so much for all of your amazing support on my channel. Let's get back to the DIYs. Next, I took a makeup sponge and the Waverly Antique Wax, and I went around the edges of the galvanized star to highlight those and make them just a little bit darker. After that, I took these letters that I got from the Dollar Tree and I put a U on the red letter, an S on the white letter, and an A on the blue letter. Then after I had them all positioned how I liked, I took my sanding block and I very lightly sanded over the letters so that they weren't so bold. Then I went over each one of the stars with some Mod Podge to protect the letters from coming up. While my stars were drying, I took this galvanized bucket that I got from the Dollar Tree and I stuck some floral foam at the bottom. Now I did end up hot gluing these down, but they actually fit and were wedged right in perfectly, so I didn't really have to use a lot of hot glue, but I did hot glue the top piece to the bottom piece so that it wouldn't move. After that, I took these dowel rods and by using my super glue and my hot glue, I attached the dowel rods to the back of the stars. The reason why I use the super glue too is because hot glue and metal do not work. They do not mix. So I put some super glue there, that way it held it down. Then I took some of my silver duct tape and I put a little strip of that to give it some extra support. I repeated this step on both of my other stars. After that, I took some black acrylic paint and I painted the dowel rods on every one of my stars. I find it easier to paint the dowel rods when they are already glued down. That way it doesn't get your fingers all messy because you have to hold the dowel rod. So now I'm able to just hold the star and just paint without making a huge mess. But I went ahead and painted all 3 of my dowel rods. After they dried, I stuck them in the foam, and I apologize, the angle here is not going to be great because it was hard for me to do it, but I will show you what it looks like. But basically, I put the U and the A in the back and then the S in the front. After that, I took these smaller pieces of twine and I made 3 bows, and I'm going to hot glue those to the dowel rod where the dowel rod meets the star, if that makes sense. So right underneath the galvanized piece. Again, it was hard for me to do this as these pieces were laying down, so I had to stand it up, but I will show you what it looks like. I did add a twine bow to all of the stars. Before I did that though, I went ahead and I added some hot glue to the holes of the foam so that way my dowel rods didn't move. After that, I took this bow that I got from the Dollar Tree, and after removing it from its packaging, I realized that the tails might have been a little too long. So I just detached the band that wrapped around, took out the tails, and hot glued it back together. After that, I added a ton of hot glue to the back of the bow and I hot glued that to the twine part of my bucket. And here is what it looks like. Then I went ahead and took my little foam pieces that I got from the Dollar Tree and I put a little white star in the middle just to add a little bit more detail. Next, I took my Waverly Antique wax and just rubbed it over the bow. That way it gave it that rustic look. Then I went in with my makeup sponge and the Waverly Antique wax and just kind of blotted it around the bucket to give it that rusty look. So I would just dab it in random places and then kind of use my finger to smear it just a little bit, and I really love the touch that this added. After that, I decided it kind of did need tails in the front, so all I did was cut them down and then hot glue it to the back of the bow. And I'm so glad I did that because it really did make the bow look complete. After that, I took some Spanish moss and I put it in my bucket to cover up all the foam, and that completed this really cute star sign. What do you think? For this third DIY, I'm going to use this wooden mason jar in the coloring kit from the Dollar Tree. Now I am going to be using the back of it, so I took this piece of scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby and I simply Mod Podged that paper down to the bottom part of the mason jar. So I made sure not to trace out the top where the lid would be, but I went ahead and traced out the bottom and then cut it out. Then by using Mod Podge, I spread it over the bottom of my mason jar and put my piece of paper right on top. You want to make sure to have a nice even layer and then push down really hard. Once I had the paper onto my mason jar, I took my sanding block and I sanded the edges to give it that nice clean edge. Now when you do this, you want to make sure to sand in the down direction to give it a clean cut. After that, I put some Mod Podge on the top of the paper, so that way it makes it seem like it's all one piece and it's all cohesive. After that, I took my hot glue gun and I just started putting strips of hot glue on the top where the jar would be. I saw this method from Cindy over at Monarch Mom DIY and I thought that it was genius. She did this to add the ridges, and then in a minute you're going to see that I'm going to add aluminum foil to make it look like the lid. But you have to make sure that your strips of glue dry completely, or else of course they'll just smear. Now I did do 2 strips, so I kind of coated it twice. That way it was thicker and would really stand out. So once your glue is completely dry, this is when you're going to take that aluminum foil, and what I did was I just pushed it on top, and now I'm taking my finger and really pushing in where the glue is, so that way it makes those distinct ridges. After that, I'm going to cut off the foil, that way it fits on my jar. After I had the piece of aluminum foil I wanted, I took my Mod Podge and I lightly coated. Now you don't want to push down on the hot glue because you want to make sure that the ridges stay there, and then you're going to put your aluminum foil back on top. Now of course you could just cut down your aluminum foil first and then do the Mod Podge, but I don't know why I didn't do that. I just decided that's what I did. And then as far as the edges, I just wrapped them around to the back and then cut off any excess aluminum foil and pushed it down really hard so that way the front was all adhered. Then to add a little detail, I took my black paint marker and I just added some squiggly lines and dots around the perimeter of the bottom of my mason jar. Next, I took some twine and starting in the back, I added some hot glue, and then I'm going to wrap my twine around where the aluminum foil and the scrapbook paper meet. Now, I had smaller pieces of twine, so I had to kind of, glue them together, but I just wrapped it around a few times. That way it hid where the foil and the scrapbook paper came together. Then I took one more piece of twine and wrapped it around the back, bringing it to the front, and then I just tied it in a simple knot. I did hot glue the tails down, that way they stayed put. After that, I took these foam stars, and I do have 2 stars glued to the front of that mason jar, but you're going to see I'm going to take them off, so I didn't even show that. But I took some wire that I had left over from a different craft and cut off a small piece and then wrapped it around my pencil to make it a curly piece of wire. Then I simply popped one of the foam stars on top of the wire. Then I'm going to glue it in the back, and I'm going to do 3 of them. So I'm going to have a white star, a blue star, and a red star. Now I did add some hot glue in the foam star, that way my wire would stay in the star. Now the blue star and the red star do look a little different because those I actually got off of a floral pick from the Dollar Tree, but you can definitely use that foam scatter that is in the 4th of July section at the store. So I did this to 3 of my stars, and then in a second you'll see that I hot glued them to the back of my mason jar, so that way the stars came up from the top. Now to glue them down, I did use a generous amount of hot glue, that way the wire stuck to the back of the foil, and I just arranged them. I put the 2 on the end a little higher and then the white one a little shorter because I really loved how that looked. Then to make it more secure, I did add a thin piece of duct tape to the back to help hold it down. Then I took one of the smaller white foam stars and I cut it in half so that way they were both flat on the back, and I hot glued one to each of my tails. I also believe I forgot to mention that I added a twine bow to the front of my twine as well. But I made sure to hot glue those down, that way they stayed, and then I cut off the extra twine hanging from the bottom. Then, of course, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and my makeup sponge and I went around the edges and a little bit in the middle of my whole piece. And then I also dabbed it on the aluminum to give it that rusty look. I also went over all of the stars as well. Then to complete this, I took this USA foam letter from that pack from the Dollar Tree and I put it at the corner in the bottom of my mason jar and then went over it with some Waverly Antique Wax. And also you can see here that I took those stars off the aluminum because I just felt that it hid it, and I think that the aluminum adds a really cool touch, so I wanted it to be more seen. So then I took the Waverly Wax and I added more of that to the foil to give it more of the rusty look, and then I hit the twine with some hot glue. That way it covered the foil and the paper meeting. After that, I took 2 tumbling tower blocks and I glued them together end to end, and then I hot glued it to the bottom of my sign to make it a standing sign. Then I took 2 more, and to give it extra support, I hot glued those on top of the ones that were already glued down. And that finished off this really cute mason jar DIY. I really love this. It was so simple to make and it's perfect for the 4th of July. What do you think? For my next DIY, I'm going to use this box sign that I got from the Dollar Tree, and after I removed it from its packaging, I'm going to use my hairdryer and my scraper tool to try to lift up that frame around the inside. Now, this is made out of cardboard, so it did bend, unfortunately, but I did want to use it, so I just carefully tried to get that off. After that, I put a good amount of Mod Podge on the top of my sign and around the sides, because I'm going to be taking a piece of scrapbook paper, but I want the whole box sign to be covered. So what I did was I started at one side and then I Mod Podged it down, and then I just flipped it over. So if you can see it, so it's covering, but you do want to make sure that you leave paper on either ends too. That way it's going to cover the entire thing. Then I went ahead and folded it over and cut off any of the excess paper. Now to help me glue the sides, I cut slits in every corner, and then basically you're just going to wrap it like a present. So I cut the slits, and now I'm going to put Mod Podge on one of the shorter sides, just like that. Then I'm going to press the paper on top. Now as far as the corners, you're going to put them underneath the longer strip. So I did the shorter sides first, and then you can see I'm Mod Podging the corners around, and then I'm going to put the longer sides on top. And then I'm going to cut off any excess paper. I hope that made sense. Next, to give me those nice clean edges, I took my sanding block and I sanded all of the excess paper around the sides down. After that, I'm going to take this other piece of scrapbook paper and I'm going to cut off a little piece long enough to fit the word America from that little foam sheet right there. So I measured it out and then I cut it down, and then that's going to go in the middle of that black frame. So I just kind of positioned it, and after I had it how I liked, I went ahead and put the word America in the middle of that piece of paper. After that, I decided I really didn't like the nice cut clean edges, so I ripped around the word just to give it a little bit more rustic detail, and I'm so glad I did because I ended up loving how that looked. After that, I Mod Podged my piece of paper in the middle of my box sign, and then I'm going to hot glue the frame around it. Then, to give it even more detail, I took these silver thumbtacks that I got from the Dollar Tree and I pushed one in every corner. Now this will go in the cardboard, you just have to use a little muscle. But after they were all pushed down in the corners, I finished this piece off by taking my Waverly Antique Wax and brushing over the word America and brushing over each one of those tacks as well. This is your friendly reminder that if you're loving what you see so far, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Not only does it help my channel to grow, but it also tells YouTube that you're loving my content and that you want to see more, so they'll put more of my videos in your home screen, and then you can catch even more DIYs. So don't forget to give me a like. I would truly appreciate it. So after I was done applying all the Waverly Antique Wax, that completed this really cute sign. And the beauty of this is that you could either use it as a standing sign or you can hang it because it is open on the back. So you don't have to add a hanger or anything. You can just throw it on a nail or a command hook and it's perfect to display for the 4th of July. Now, does this not scream America and patriotism? It is so red, white, and blue and I love it. But what do you think? For my 4th DIY, I'm going to start off with this framed picture from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to remove the plastic and then pull off the foam flower that was on the front. After that, I'm going to take out the back of the photo. Then by using this scrapbook paper, I'm going to Mod Podge it down on the picture. Now you want to make sure to put a nice thin and even layer all over and make sure to get those edges as well. After my paper is adhered down, I take my little knife and I cut around the edges. And then I'm going to go back over it with my sanding block to get any excess paper off and give it that nice clean cut. After that, I'm going to take this USA coloring kit that I also got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to give this a really good coat of white Waverly chalk paint. Once my paint was dry, I took this washi tape and I'm going to tape off a square at the corner of the map, and I bet you know where we're going with this. Then once it's all taped off, I'm going to take my Ocean Waverly chalk paint and I'm going to paint the inside of that square. I'm also going to make sure to get the edges of it as well. Once that was dry, I removed the washi tape and I put it back, but on the inside of the square. Then I'm going to take more washi tape and I'm going to cut off some strips to make the stripes on our flag. Now, because I wanted my first stripe to be red at the top, I went ahead and put a spacer piece there and then started making my little strips underneath that. Now, when I got to the bottom where Texas and Florida are, it was a little harder to put just one full strip of tape down, so I did have to put a couple different strips, which you'll see in 1 second. Then I went ahead and wrapped the tape around the sides. That way I didn't get any paint on those sides either. Now here's when I decide just to cut in the middle of Texas and Florida and just give them their own piece of tape because it just stuck better like that. Then after all of my tape was on and pressed on very well, I went ahead and took my crimson Waverly chalk paint and I painted all of my stripes. After that was dry, I went ahead and I peeled up all of my tape. Now, for some reason, and I always do this, my red stripes are not connecting to the blue, so I just took some paint and I just made some touch-ups. After that, I took my white paint marker and I simply just drew on some stars. After that, I took my sanding block and I sanded the whole thing down really well. Now again, if you do not like the rustic look, you can absolutely skip this step. But you know me, I love the rustic look, so I definitely wanted to sand it down. Then after that, I took my makeup sponge and my Waverly Antique Wax and I went around the edges of the USA, and then I also hit the middle of it as well. I also wanted to distress the frame, so I took my Waverly Antique Wax and I hit the sides of that as well. After that was dry, I replaced the back of the picture into the frame, and then by using 2 tumbling tower blocks, I hot glued those on either side of the map, and then I hot glued that in the middle of my scrapbook paper. After that, I took these rub-on words that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I cut out the word home that is on that sheet. Now I decided to personalize this a little bit, and since I live in Ohio, I took this little heart confetti piece that I had from Valentine's Day and I put it where Ohio would be, and then I took that rub-on word and rubbed it on right underneath the heart. Now to do this, I did use a craft stick and it seemed to work out pretty well. Then I hot glued the heart down, and because the heart is red and the stripe is red, I took my white paint marker and I colored the heart white. Now it's gonna look pink here because somehow I got some red paint on my white paint marker, but I do go back and fix it. Now when I pulled off the transfer, some of my letters did get messed up, so I just took a black permanent marker and made some touch-ups, and after that, this was complete. I love this, but what do you think? DIY, I decided that I was going to make some sparklers or some fireworks. So I saw a lot of crafters do a lot of different ideas, but I really wanted to come up with my own. So when I saw these little finger shooters at the Dollar Tree, I picked up 2 packs, although you could probably get away with just using 1. So I went ahead and took them out of their packaging, and then I pulled off the little yellow things hanging off. Next, I took 3 of them, and I'm only going to be using 3, and I kind of just measured 3 different lengths and 3 different sizes. Then by using this little knife, I simply cut them down, and this was so easy to cut. Once I had them all cut down to the right size, I gave them all a coat of Waverly chalk paint in white. After they were all dry, I took the tallest one and I painted that with red paint. Now here I am using acrylic paint, but later on in the video I actually switched to crimson, which is a Waverly chalk paint, and I'm gonna show you why in a little bit. Then I took my medium-sized firework and I painted that with my Ocean Waverly chalk paint, and then I kept the smallest one in just the white. After that, I went ahead and used my hot glue to glue them all together. I put the tallest and the medium in the back and then the smallest in the front. After the glue was dry, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and I brushed over all of my fireworks. Now for this 4th of July season, I am going for rustic Americana, so I'm going to distress all of my pieces. If you don't like that look, you can absolutely skip this stuff. You definitely don't have to do it. After that, I took my blue, white, and red twine and I wrapped it around the middle of my fireworks, cut it off, and then tied a knot. Next, I took these foam stickers that I got from the Dollar Tree and I put a blue star on each of the ends of my twine. For the tops of my fireworks, I actually had this wire left over from a project that I did, and it's kind of like wrapped in paper. So I just cut them down and used my needle nose pliers to flip the top under to make it kind of wound. And then I made sure to put 2 stems in each firework, and I made one taller than the other. And I did use hot glue to tack them in. Then to finish this off, I used a makeup sponge and my Waverly Antique Wax and just dabbed it right over the wire because I wanted them to look rustic as well. I love how these little fireworks came out. I think that it was so creative and also so simple and probably would only cost you $1. For my next DIY, I took this pack of 4 mini dice that I got from the Dollar Tree, and we're only going to use 3 of them. So on one of them, I went ahead and I painted in red paint, and as you can see, I'm using a skewer to hold it so I don't get paint all over my fingers, although I do anyways, but there's just a tip for you. Then I paint one in the Waverly chalk paint in white, and then one in the Ocean blue chalk paint. Now here's where I switched to the red chalk paint, and I'm going to show you why. Look at the difference between acrylic paint and chalk paint. That red is 2 coats of red acrylic paint, and that Waverly white paint is 1 coat, and that blue is 1 coat. So all the time I get questions, what's the difference between acrylic paint and chalk paint? That's it right there. It's thicker and it covers better. After all my dice were painted and dried, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and my favorite distressing brush again, and I distressed each one of these. After that, I took this sheet of foam stickers, and for 4th of July, glitter doesn't really bother me. You'll see that I do tone it down, but I think that 4th of July is such a fun holiday and sparkly holiday, so glitter doesn't bother me. But what I did was I wanted to use 1 letter on each of the die. So I'm just using my knife to cut them apart. And then this is how I dull them down. I just go ahead and put Waverly Antique Wax on top. Now, I do realize that I messed up here because I wanted one of each color, red, white, and blue, on each one of the dice, or one dice. So you're going to see me pause for a second because I realized I messed up the color. So I'm actually going to go back and paint the U with white paint, and then that way I have one of each color. It'll make sense here in 1 second. But I went ahead and put the S on the white and then the A on the blue, and then I'm going to paint the U with the white paint, and then I'm actually going to cut the, you can see right behind my hand that there's another USA in red, so I'm going to use that A instead. But I would highly recommend, if you're going to do this, to paint the U while it's still on the sheet. That way you don't get the paint on the die. If I would have thought about it, that's definitely what I would have done. But there we go. I just cut off the red A and then I applied it to the blue block. Now I am just distressing the tops of each of those letters, and now it's time to stack them. So I went ahead and hot glued them, kind of not straight up and down, but kind of twisted, and that way it looked like just a block display, I guess. And then I'm going to add one of those little sparkly white stars on top and put some Waverly Antique Wax to finish that. Next, of course, we have a little gnome. So I picked this gnome up from the Dollar Tree, and the first thing I did was paint the hat with white paint. Now, you can actually, I think you can skip this step, because when I started this, I really did not know how I was going to decorate him. I just kind of, you know, I always start off with white paint because it's easy to paint over if I change my mind. But I did go ahead and paint his hat white. After that, I took a small brush and that crimson Waverly wax, and I painted his shirt with that. And in a minute, we're going to pick up on some Santa Claus vibes. So I knew I had to do something about that. After his shirt was painted, I took my Waverly chalk paint in white and painted his pants with that. And like I said, here comes Santa Claus. But don't worry, we're going to make this look more patriotic. So then of course, I changed my mind. So that's why I said you can skip that step, because that hat was actually blue. Unless your hat's not blue, then you're going to have to paint it blue. So I did go ahead and paint it with that ocean blue chalk paint. And then once that dried, I took my white paint marker and I just drew dots all over the hat. Next, I took a little glitter heart that I had left over from Valentine's Day, and I cut it down so it would fit on the hat. And then I hot glued it right in the front. Then I took this pack of American flag picks that I got from Hobby Lobby, and by using a baby wipe and my Waverly Antique Wax, I went ahead and stained the stick of it, and then I hot glued it right in front of him so it kind of looked like he was holding it. And I think this little guy came out so cute and super patriotic. Next up, we of course cannot forget about a beaded garland. So I'm going to be using these white and natural beads that I already had in my stash and some white twine, and then I'm actually going to be using those square beads. I did not end up using that other pack of beads. So now I am going to just pull the blue beads and the red beads, and I'm just going to separate them. Next, it's time to start threading them through. So I put a little hot glue at the end so it was easier for me to put the beads on, and then the pattern I followed was white bead, red bead, natural bead, blue bead, and then I just did that until all of my natural beads and white beads were gone, because I had less of those than I did the red and blue. But I just did that until they were all threaded. Now, of course, I was one white bead short, so I grabbed a 20 millimeter bead, which I do have linked in the description box below from Amazon, and I just painted it white and then threaded it through. After that, I tied it in the knot at the end, and now it was time to make a tassel. So I grabbed my white my red, white, and blue twine, and I just wrapped them several times around a sand block going the long way. I like to use the sand block because I like the length of it. I like it for a tassel. So I just wrapped and wrapped and wrapped until I got the thickness that I wanted. After that, I pulled off my tassel and I cut it off from the spools. And then by using the loop in the tassel, I tied one of the ends through the beaded garland end. I hope that made sense. So I took the end of the garland and looped it through the opening of the tassel, and I just tied it in a simple knot. Then I'm going to take a smaller piece of white twine and I'm going to put it near the top, but not all the way at the top. That way it gives it that tassel look, and I'm going to wrap that around several times and tie it off. Now I do go in with some hot glue and tack everything down. Next, I push my beads all the way down so the bead next to the tassel is flush against it and it's nice and tight. Then I cut off the bottom of the tassel and make all of those strings even at the bottom. And now I'm just kind of cleaning it up and cutting off any of those extra strings on my tassel and then tacking it all down. Next, I went ahead and applied some hot glue to the other end just to make sure that the beads don't move. And then we're going to make a little piece to tie on to that end. I took this pack of black chalkboard tags that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I cut it down so that way it was proportional to my garland. As you can see, my garland's not very long, so I did have to make my tag a little smaller so it would just look right and look better. So after I got that all cut down, I went ahead and cut off the string on the chalkboard tag, although I probably could have left it on. Then I took the other end of the garland and I put it through, and then I hot glued the string down to the chalkboard tag to attach it to my beaded garland. After that, I took these stencils that I found in Crafter Square at the Dollar Tree and I cut out the map of the United States. I will not recommend these stencils. They were terrible. They were so hard. It took me forever to scrape this, and there were still pieces missing from it. So I do not recommend. In fact, I tried doing some stars and everything, and I cut that all out because it just was going to take up too much time. But I just do not recommend. But finally, once I pulled up the United States, I took my white chalk marker and I just went around it and gave it some stitch marks. I really wanted to do a lot more of this tag because I wanted to use those stars that are on that sheet too. Like I said, I just didn't have the patience for it, so I gave up. But I still really love how it came out. There's my beaded garland. Next up, of course, we have the stack of books. So I'm taking this crate that I got from the Dollar Tree, peel off the tag, and I'm going to paint this entire thing with white chalk paint. After it was dry, I'm taking my washi tape and I'm going to create the stripes on the top. So I'm going to put one stripe down, then I'm going to do another one right beneath it as my spacer, and then a third one underneath that. And then this is where I got smart and cut off smaller ones, and then I used that longer one to cover. And then once all of my washi tape was down, I used that crimson paint in red and that Waverly paint, and I went ahead and painted on the red stripes. Now, I realized after I did this that the red stripe should have technically been the top stripe, so next time I will paint it correctly. Sorry about that. After I did the top, I also, as you can see, painted the top of the side of the books. Now look at those clean lines except for that little spot, but easy peasy. I just took a wipe and cleaned it off and then just dabbed some white paint over it to fix it. So now going back to the front of the books, I am going to leave the middle part white, and then I'm going to take these little stickers that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to put a few on that bottom little part of the books. And then after they're all down, I'm going to take my ocean blue chalk paint and I'm going to paint over the stars with that. After my blue was completely dry, I took my knife and I went ahead and pulled up all of the stars. This actually worked really well. I was quite pleased with how these came out. After that, I made a few touch-ups and then I took my sanding block and sanded the entire thing down. Look at that. Oh my gosh, I love how that's sanded. I just love that look. I love that rustic look. Sorry, I don't think I can say that enough. So after that, I took these stencils from the Dollar Tree and I highly recommend these. They are perfect size for these stacked books and they are sticky. So you can put them right on there and they will stick. And then I used black acrylic paint and my makeup sponge and I just went ahead and dabbed that on there and I spelled out "Let Freedom Ring." Now, one thing, you can see that I have a capital L and a capital E and I didn't realize it, but I pulled off the lowercase t. I did not realize that until this was dry, so you just want to make sure that you're pulling the right letter off. So then I went ahead and put on freedom. Now, because there's two E's and there's only one on the sheet, I put a C in there just as a space holder. And then I am drying in between, that way they don't smudge. But like I said, look how nice those came out. I absolutely love it. And I think the font of these is perfect for 4th of July. It just looks like that old-timey classy look. And I really, really loved those. So look how those came out. Ugh, I love that. So after that was done, again, I made some little touch-ups and then I sanded over the letters just a little bit, just to dull down the bold black of the letters. Next, I put some Mod Podge over the front to protect the paint, and then I also hit the top as well. I really love finishing my projects with Mod Podge because, like I said, it protects your paint. After that, I took this burlap polka dot ribbon that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to wrap it up on the top and the sides to cover the holes on the sides, but I decided that I actually wanted to fray the edges, so I'm just cutting off the wire, and then I'm going to pull some string off of all the sides to give it that frayed look. And then after I'm done with that, I'm going to start on one side at the bottom, and I'm going to start gluing it, but I'm going to offset it, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. But I'm going to offset it because I'm actually going to layer 2 of these. So I'm going to do this twice. So you can see that I had it in the middle first, and then I scooted it over so it covered half of that hole. I hope that made sense. And then I just every so often just tacked it down, and you want to make sure to pull it really tight. That way it's nice and even. It doesn't wrinkle up or come up. And then, like I said, I decided that I was going to double up, so I just repeated the same process and then added that second strip right next to this first strip. Then to go on top of that ribbon, I'm going to take this navy blue and silver ribbon that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put two right next to each other, so this is not directly in the middle, but it's kind of off to the side of the middle, if that makes sense. And then after I'm done with this piece, I'll cut off another piece and go the other way and put it right next to it. And now it looks like one big piece of ribbon. After that, I'm going to take this red ribbon, and this is going to go in the middle so it covers up the seam of the blue ribbon. And I'm going to go all the way around just like I did with the other pieces. Now, I'm not going to lie, it does bug me that that red ribbon is a different color than the red paint, so I just took my Waverly Antique Wax and went over it to kind of make it not so bright. And then I hit the box as well, especially the side, so it makes it look like pages, book pages, but I really wanted to dab that on there. After that, I took this door hanger with bells that I got at the Dollar Tree, and I took all of the ribbons off, including that blue bow, which we are going to use. After that, I hot glued the bells on one side of my crate. That way it would read, "Let Freedom Ring," and then there you have the bells. So I just layered them on top of each other, but made sure that they were different lengths. Cut off any of the excess, and now I'm going to take that blue bow that came on the door hanger, and it was perfect for this. I hot glued it down, and then I'm just kind of tacking these down so they just don't like move everywhere and swing everywhere. I want them to stay in the front of this so the whole thing makes sense, obviously. And then I had this raffia bow left over from a different DIY, so I just hot glued that on top of the blue bow. Next, I'm taking my Waverly Antique Wax and a baby wipe, and I'm just dulling down the glitter of these bells by rubbing that on there. To finish this, I am putting one of those foam glitter star stickers on top and adding some Waverly Antique Wax to that. All right, next up are my famous rolling pins, the mini rolling pins. Now, I make my own because I can never find them at Hobby Lobby, and I just don't want to pay a lot for them. So I took a plunger stick, I took off the sticker, and before cutting this down, I did cut off the ends, and then I measured 5 inches, and I was able to get 3 5-inch sticks for both. Now, I do this a lot slower in other videos, so if you want to see how I do that, you can check the other tiered tray videos out. But then after that, I painted one with white chalk paint, the second one with red paint, and the other one in white paint. That's right, I did 2 with white and 1 with red. So then on one of the white pins, I took these star stickers that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I put 3 stars right next to each other. I'm sorry if this looks like this is going fast. It's just that I've made these so many times that I just kind of go through it very quickly, and then that way I can refer you to a slower video. But yeah, and then I went ahead and painted that with ocean paint. Then after that dried, I went ahead and took off the stars, and how satisfying is that? They came out really well. Now, to make the ends of my rolling pins, I use earplugs that I get from the Dollar Tree, and I just simply hot glue them down on each end. I do this before I paint them because it just makes it so much easier. So then after they are glued down, I took my red crimson paint, and I just simply painted the ends of my rolling pins. To finish this one off, I took this red and burlap, actually, striped ribbon that I got from Michael's on sale after Christmas, and I just tied a little bow around one end of my rolling pin. And I really love this because it's not red and white, it's red and burlap, and so it gives it that rustic look. Next, I took the other white rolling pin, and I just used my washi tape, and of course I bet you can guess what we're about to do. We're about to make stripes on this one. So I just put down 2 pieces of washi tape on that, and then once I had that down, I painted the open spaces with that red crimson chalk paint. After that was dry, I went ahead and hot glued my earplugs on this, and then I painted the earplugs with the Blue Ocean chalk paint. Now, I did decide not to add any bows or twine or anything to this. I just left it with the stripes and the blue ends because I think that it was detailed enough. On the red one, I took some of those red letters and I'm gonna spell out America, so apostrophe M-E-R-I-C-A, and I'm starting at one end and I'm putting the A first, so I'm working my way backwards. And then once all my letters are down, I'm gonna paint over the entire thing with white Waverly chalk paint. After it's dry, I'm taking my knife again and I'm just gonna peel up all of my letters. Now you can see that I had some bleeding, but I just took my red paint and I just cleaned it up, and then I just made some touch-ups. And then for this one, after I hot glued my earplugs down, I went ahead and painted these ones with the Blue Ocean chalk paint as well. Then to complete this one, I took some blue and white twine and the red twine, and I just tied a knot at the end of this rolling pin, and that completed this little set of mini rolling pins, and I cannot wait to put them on my tiered tray. These have been a huge hit, and you guys have been loving them. Okay, well that completes 10 DIYs that I had from last year that I thought I would add to this video this year. Here's just a little overview of some of my tiered tray DIYs from last year. If you're seeing some DIYs that I did not make in this video, you can catch my 10 Patriotic tiered tray DIYs on my channel. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and join me next time because I'm going to come out with some really fun content. Well, until I see you again, I'll craft with you soon. Bye!